Hello, welcome to the Turret of Pleasure in the Enchanted Kingdom of Hermione. Here, just in the environs of Sook, BC. I'm your host, Zip Gun. I am the Lord Chamberlain of the Enchanted Kingdom, and we're in the nerve center of entertainment up here. I was going to talk about something that's near to my heart that I haven't really discussed except perhaps in passing. And that is that wonderful phenomenon once known as quadraphonic sound. Quadraphonic sound. Back in the old days when I was a very young child, there was but monophonic. But we didn't know it was monophonic. It was sound. Came out of that speaker there. Great. I heard all the Beatles. Heard all the Stones, the Who, all of that great classic stuff. I heard it out of one speaker. One fine day I discovered I could attach a wire to the two terminals of where the speaker connected to my record player and add another speaker, which I thought was completely cool. So I could have a speaker here and one here. Now it was in mono, of course, and I just thought the fact that it was coming from both sides was cool for my little record player that I had. But the idea of stereo never really occurred to me until I heard the Royal Guardsman Snoopy songs. They did about 3, I think. And their stereo was extreme. The band was on one side, and the vocals are on the other side. And whoever put these singles out put them out that way, like many of the Beatles' early stereo mixes. So when I was very young, and I mean this is whenever that was, I was 7 maybe, I thought that stereo meant the instruments come out of one side and the vocals come out of the other side. Kind of cool, but hard to get into when you were in between the two speakers. Sounded kind of strange. I used to listen to my mom's big cabinet stereo, and I'd sit on the floor with my head up against it, and there'd be a speaker here and a speaker here. That's when I first discovered what stereo was all about. And of course, I was enthusiastic. Nothing was for it. I would have to get a stereo system. And I had one of those for, had one for a long time. But then in the 70s, along came this thing called quadraphonic sound. And my old, dear, late friend, Richard Harvey Moore, Big Tim, he really turned me on to quadraphonic sound. And I became a real enthusiast. Quadraphonic sound was, instead of having a left and a right, and there it is in front of you in beautiful stereoscopy, you'd have a right and a left rear as well. You could be in the middle of it. How cool is that? So this is a great idea. And of course, it persists today in what is now 5.1 Dolby, I guess you'd call it. But in the old days, there was different ways. They wanted to try and fit it into the accepted sort of basic equipment that people were buying in those days. So it quickly became apparent that they wanted it in LP and in tape formats. And the tape format that was most popular at the time, this is in the late 60s, was 8-track of all things. So 8-track quadraphonic, easy. Instead of 4 groups of 2 tracks, you had 2 groups of 4 tracks. Easy. Not compatible, but easy. Okay, so that kind of, and it was good separation. And the big problem with quad all through the years was front to rear separation. And because the music companies, whatever, manufacturing companies, because the industrialists, the capitalist fucking pigs, are such idiots, they all developed different non-compatible types of quadraphonic and tried to sell them to the public. And they did try mightily, and they kind of almost succeeded, sort of, maybe. Anyway, I've collected these records over the years, and I have a system now that allegedly plays in quad. Now, there were 3 main kinds of quadraphonic, and they were, rather confusingly, there was one called SQ, there was one called QS, and there was one called CD4. Now, there was a whole bunch of other little ones, like Electro Voice had one, and there's a newer one called UHJ. But all but the CD4 work on what they call matrix systems, and they work on phase relationships. And to make it real simple, because the math in this is crazy, and I don't get the math. Essentially, whatever is in a 90-degree, I think it is, phase from the front channels is interpreted by the equipment sent to the rear channels. Because this is kind of not a perfect system, because the old analog gear had trouble figuring stuff out, on the cheap quad systems you would buy, there wouldn't be a lot of front to rear separation, which is kind of what makes quad quad. Anyways, Sony, CBS Sony, came up with a system called SQ. This was a phase system, phase-based system. At the same time, Sansui in Japan came up with the QS system. Same idea, but not compatible with SQ. Great. Okay, then around about the same time, I think the QS and SQ came out a month apart. Crazy. And then JVC in Japan, RCA Japan, Japan Victor Company as it's called, they came up with CD4. CD4 worked on a completely different principle where the rear channel information was encoded into high frequency signals that had to be demodulated from the turntable. Now this was CDs. The D stood for discrete, and this was apparently a discrete format. Worked really well when it was working, and we'll get to that. Anyways, Columbia Records and EMI in Europe adopted the SQ system. Let me think now. ABC Records. A few companies adopted the QS system. Not very many record companies now, we're talking. And the CD4 system was championed largely by RCA and WIA. So depending on the artist, here's the weird one. MCA never really picked it up. So Quadraphonia by The Who never came out in quad. So anyway, in the early days, and to market this stuff, they tried, boy. So here we got one of my faves, Firesign Theater. I think we're only, what is it? I think we're all bozos on this bus, right? Now, note the giant gold surround. The back is close to the original, but there's a thing about this. So these were specially made, these records. They changed all the graphics. This one I've just got. This has I think this was the typical gold label for Columbia SQ in America. Now, for whatever reason, they didn't want to spend all that money on gold paint in Canada, and they made them gray with red. And one of these days, I'm going to do a video just on the Columbia record variations. Here, I was talking about Redbone the other day. Here's Redbone SQ. This is 1971. This one has the blurb. This is pretty cool. It's got the thing. I got a few of these in her sleeves. The Record Collector's Guide to Quadraphonic Sound. They don't mention that there's more than one type of quadraphonic sound. And there's a whole explanation, which is as clear to mud. There's a kind of a weird one. The gold Epic label. Hang on you. So, gold Epic label. This record's not in the greatest shape, so I can treat it rather irreverently. And yeah, anything on Columbia Epic, Blue Sky. Here we got another. Now this is great. This is an example. This is a Canadian one. Okay, so Canadian Epic, Edgar Winter, gray with white and red. And I'll show you. I'll probably get to a Columbia one later. Now this is great because this is Edgar Winter's Frankenstein. It's going to be great in quad, you know. Except that now, remember, bearing in mind here, these all had to be remixed into quadraphonic. And like in the early days of stereo, you think they'd learn, they didn't really pay a lot of attention. So here we go, quadraphonic sound supervision, Harold Kleiner, and then a couple of these when it comes. Edgar Winter quadraphonic remix engineer Don Young. Now, on this particular one, in the end of Frankenstein, right after the great timbale solo, if you, I can't play it because I don't have the thing here, but um, on the quad version, that it comes in very abruptly and many seconds earlier than on the stereo. So it's a different version, if you will. You notice that I had the gold surround. By the next album, the gold surround was gone. They just put Quadraphonic in really big letters at the top. Hopefully people didn't get fooled. Oh, Edgar. Now this one's probably, what is this? Another gray label. Okay. So generally, if you're looking for these in a store, first of all, none of these are really worth that much money, apparently, which kind of makes me happy. Oh, God. Okay, so here we go. So after a while, they went to, yeah. So that's another, this is a great one, Charles Ives. Now, this would be a gold label Columbia, wouldn't it? Yes. So gold label Columbia, very typical. They didn't differentiate between Masterworks and regular Columbia like they did in stereo. Stereo regular Columbias are red, Masterworks were gray. Now we come to an interesting phenomenon. As quad waned, CBS, and we're sticking with CBS here all the way so far, they sort of thought, the gold band, yeah, that was pretty much, yeah. People were scared. So we'll take the gold band off. Okay, well, it's still kind of, people think they're buying something weird. I don't know. How can we sell them quad records that won't make them think they can't buy it if they don't have a quad system? Because, of course, you can play matrix quad records on a stereo system. They are compatible. Anyways, they came up with what Big Tim and I called ghost quads. Now, this is the only ghost quad, I think, that isn't classical that I know of. The Preservation Jazz Band, the label is the regular, in this case, special label for this release, but there is no mention of Quadraphonic on the label. There is a weird clue that I'll show you with a different one. Anyway, these are interesting because the only mention of Quadraphonic is down here in the corner. There's just by the way, just so you know, this stereo Quadraphonic disc is fully compatible with every audio system, stereo or 4-channel, with no need to change stylus or cartridge. Played on SQ Quadraphonic systems, it will provide a new and captivating musical experience. Now, the reason they mention styli is because the CD4 system, which we'll get to in a minute, required a special needle, a Shibata stylus, as it's known. This is my old car. I've had this forever. Now, this has a special needle, which is a shaped needle that goes into the special grooves of the CD4 records. We'll get to that. This is another ghost quad. Whereas, again, just the tiniest mention here. Everything, and the other thing is on the spine. Normally, a Columbia record says Columbia Stereo. In the early days, it would say Columbia Quadraphonic. Finally, they just said, just put Columbia. So just these ones. So if I'm looking through a thrift store and there's 16 million classical records, I can look at these and oh, wait a minute, just Columbia? That's a ghost quad. And the labels are also strange. They're just straight gray Masterwork labels, but none of the serial numbers are in bold type, unlike every other Masterwork. So there have been a few ghost quads that weren't quads, of course. That just makes it interesting, right? Now here's a really weird one. I got 2 copies of this, what I call second era CBS SQ quad. Good old Paul Simon. There goes Ryman Simon. Yeah, so this is your second generation Canadian quad label. White band, red print, gray middle. The gray middle was weird because you'd think you were getting a Masterworks record, but in fact you were getting a pop record. Now this one, I've got 2 copies of this record. And the cool thing is and I was going to show this because this is a whole side project, but I'll try and do it quickly. This is one from Britain. Now, in Britain, they didn't want to spend the effort to make these records in Britain because they were different stampers. So they simply imported American records. Now, in the case of this title, they made their own cover, though. So this is a British cover, and they've gone and stuck the sticker on it, SQ CBS, Q, and they've done it on the back as well. It's got the British number, but, oh yeah, look at this. Woo! That's just great. I love that. It's got an American gold label with blue print. And, oh, but this is in fact, okay, wait a minute. This is an American-made record. But it says, in blue print instead of red print, CBS. And that's instead of Columbia. The reason being, this is a long story, I'll try to make short. Columbia was a name that both EMI and CBS used in the good old days. And after a lot of confusion, EMI decided they would no longer use the Columbia name and instead switched everything to the label called Odeon. And Columbia CBS decided that they would no longer use the name Columbia in Britain and they would use the name CBS Records. Now this became kind of funny when they decided to import Bob Dylan Desire in Quadraphonic to Britain, because I got bad news for these guys. The word Columbia is all over this. And so here they took the Columbia and they put little orange stickers all over everything. Just, by the letter of the law, if you will. But here's the best part. Not only did they did it on the labels. So absolutely, because this is an American-made record. But for whatever reason, that other one I saw was an American-made record, but it was, I think, made for the British market, and so exported. Anyways, that's a weird side note. They had to put stickers on everything. I got another one, I can't remember which one it is, where there's big orange circles around the edge. Now, EMI also got into the quadraphonic game, but not in pop music in America. God knows why. I don't know. These guys were idiots. However, in Britain they embraced it, and who better to come out in quadraphonic than our pals in Pink Floyd? Now this record is in fairly crude quad because there's a great quadraphonic sound. That's the EMI thing. You'll note the lovely Harvest label has its little. And this is what they did in Europe. They give it its own label, but just put a little SQ thing on it. Nice and subtle, typical Brits, And this came out, Adam Hartmother came out, and here we've got Dark Side. Woohoo! Dark Side came out in quad. Now, Dark Side in quad, needless to say, is quite great. Uh-oh, one of the very rare stickers fell out. This one has its own quad Dark Side label. Woo, special label. Yeah. And I think this sold okay in quad in Britain. Now, the problem, of course, was that the SQ system didn't have the best separation. So the effect was somewhat lost when you listen to the immersion boxes, which have the 4.0 quad mixes, but in digital locked Dolby, pretty much discrete. They're really great mixes. I mean, Pink Floyd in quad is wonderful. QS, not a lot of stuff came out in QS, but this is my pride of place. Sun Ra's Astro Black in quadraphonic. What could be finer? Sadly, I've never heard this in real quad. This only has the tiniest note. This record was mixed for quadraphonic. Compatible stereo and quadraphonic QS. Almost nothing on the label. Compatible stereo quad. Now, if I remember right, all the copies of this record came out like this. In other words, there's no special quad version. There's just what there is. CD4 stuff. Here's some. Now, CD4 labels were great because, oh, there we go. Look at that. The inner sleeve again. The color. Ooh. About This Quadradisc by Ivan Berger. Now, this is funny because this is clearly an RCA insert, but I think this did come with this record. Like all the Warner stuff, they just put a little Quadradisc logo on it and leave the label regular. And the logo that they used was different. You see this logo, it means it's anything to do with WEA, basically, Warner Electro Atlantic. If you see Quadradisc, like it says there, that's RCA specific. So, oh, look at this. Muscle of Love in quad. This actually, this fell off. The quad sticker. This is actually the stereo box. Everything in its stereo except the record has a quad logo. Joni Mitchell, same thing. They just stuck a sticker on it, right? Just before they drilled the delete hole in it. This is really good in quad, this record. Oh, the Quadradisc. Same thing, just an Asylum label. Little quad logo in the corner. Early RCA quads were like the CBS quads in that they gave it a border. And look how dirty this is. And, you know, it's not quite as dramatic as the gold border. The back cover is exactly... Oh, wait a minute. Hey, I just noticed something. So they've taken... These are the old school covers, the cardboard covers where you'd slap a thing on this and then on there. This part is stereo. This other part is quad. So they didn't want to wait. And then there's the quite lovely RCA quad label of the time. Sort of an orange, you know, quad label. The Atlantic Group also used the RCA version of the Quadradisc. Why did they put out Monkey Grip in quad? This is not a good record. Look at that label, though. Special label for Bill Wyman's Vanity Issue solo project. I don't remember this record being any good at all. There's a song about pussy in the well that was kind of cute. $2.50 I paid for this. Monkey Grip. Fully compatible quadraphonic. Yeah. And, yeah, look at this. Sonny Chirac and Quadraphonic. What's not to like? Now, problem here, and this was a very major problem with some of these CD4 discs. I think this one is one of them. Yeah, you can't, I don't know if you can see it. Shine the light, maybe? But this one is heat damage, but only on one side. Now, I can assure you that the surface noise of this record is unbelievably high. Yeah, this side is okay. Weird. Note the different colored label for Atlantic. That's kind of sexy for us label junkies. And the nice big Quadradisc. And I remember this not being in bad quad either. It was the part that plays. Sadly, the first side, if I remember, is pretty much fucked. And this was a common problem with CD4. I don't really know why. More sexy stuff. One of these days I'm going to do a whole video on the Finador label. Finador was Atlantic. Every Finador record I own has a cut in it. This was a weird avant-garde. There's your Quadradisc, and there's your Finador label with the quad on it. Finador was started by a friend of the Erdigans, a guy named Ilan Memoroliu, if I'm pronouncing his name even remotely correctly. And he put out a lot of cool records. And he was really into quad. I think he put several records out in quad. There's not that many Finador records out there. I collect them, and they're hard to find, and nobody knows anything about the label. And it's just a little bit of a mystery. But this is John Cage winter music for 4 pianos in quad. I'm going to love that. I've played that in quad. It's pretty cool. But my pride of place, I looked for this for a long time. Yes, Metal Machine Music did come out in quad. Lou, in fact, insisted upon it, I believe. And that's the Pop RCA quad label. Kind of cool. Now, from what I understand, the rear channel information of this record is simply the front channel information of this record played backwards. And when Lou mastered it, he did it in 2 mastering rooms, I forget where, and just sat in the hallway and listened to it and went, yeah, that's great. I bought this. I looked for this for a long time. Now, the amazing thing about this record, I don't know if I just realized this. I bought this off a guy who runs a label called 20 Skadillion Watts Records. And he's a Velvet Underground junkie of the first water. And he was doing an auction. Now, I don't do auctions. So, but he had an auction. He had a copy of this auction starting at $50. So I contacted him, pre-internet days. You know, how much you want for this thing? Well, auction. I don't do auctions. Well, you know, just put a bid in for $50. He says you'll probably get it for $50. Oh, okay, I'll pay $50 for it. I think it's the most I've ever paid for a record, $50. And he goes, "Why are you so curious to hear this in quad?" And I told him the story. He goes, "Well, it's all just noise, isn't it?" I go, "No, it's electric guitar sped way up." And he was fat. "How do you know that?" So, well, I played it. I can play it on my Thorns turntable. You slide the belt off and just have the drive shaft driving it. He goes, "Wow, would you tape it for me like that?" And I went, "Well, you know, if you sell me one." "Oh, no." So he sent me all the ones he had. He had 3. He says, "Pick the best ones you want." And I managed to find the cover, the quad specific cover that does not have a delete hole or a corner cut off or a saw blade mark in it. This, my friends, is a fucking rare record. And a wonderful piece of art. So anyway, those are the 3 basic quads and what they look like and stuff. Needless to say, quad died right around when the ghost quads came in. That was it. Quad was dead. And it kind of lay fallow until the age of digital came along. Now, digital being phase perfect, you could do things like 5.1 digital, and it's astonishing. It's ping pong. And mercifully, some record companies have been putting out some of these records, the Pink Floyd records, for example, in digital mix with digital copies of the original quad mixes in formats that you can now play with perfect discrete separation, and they're really great. And for a guy like me, it's like finally, guys like me who constantly tweaked the CD4. CD4 had to have the special cartridge, the special needle, low capacitant leads in the tone arm. Good luck with that. It then went into a demodulator, and the demodulator separated everything and sent it to its respective channels. And this is all great, except the records had to be capable of playing up to 60,000 cycles, because these cartridges, most cartridges cut off at 22,000 cycles. These had to be good to about 80, I think it was, to carry that rear information. And of course, in order to convey all of this very complex information, you needed good pressings. Guess what? The mid-70s in America, pressings, well, I pointed out the Herbie Mann one, for example. The pressings were dog shit. The noise was, because the needle sat lower in the groove, they wore out. If you played the CD4 with a regular stylus, you wore out the rear channel information. It was a really bad idea that didn't work. Well, it worked fine, but it was, I don't know. It was, if you want, the kind of guy that would be into CD4 quad would be the kind of guy who willingly buys a 1977 British Leyland V12 Jaguar. That's the kind of person that would do that. Anyway, that's my little blurb about Quadraphonic. I collect these records still. I got lots of them. A couple of thousand, I'm sure. And I don't really play them on the system anymore because most of the ones I want to hear, you can get them digitally now. And I can listen to it here on the turret in fantastic surround. The new Pink Floyd big box set has a secret 5.1 mix of metal in it, which is absolutely mind-blowingly good. So I'm having lots of fun with surround all over again, years after the fact. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. And we're getting through the COVID slowly but surely. So wear your mask. Be nice to everybody else. Don't take shit from Whitey. We'll talk to you soon.